All right, good morning, everyone. This is Max Munns from Acumen. I have Nick Nabozny, Jen McGraw, Stephen Phelps, and Don Farber here with me. We're going to go ahead and get started. The title of today's presentation is Operational Intelligence. It's one of our favorites over here because it provides visibility and insight into data within an organization. Don Farber is actually a founder, or one of the founders of Sage Alerts and Workflow, and Don's going to be talking about operational intelligence today and how Sage Alerts and Workflow can contribute to that. So, Don, we'll take it over and push it over to you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for spending some time with me today. We've got a lot of content to cover. I think you'll find it quite interesting. So without further ado, let's get right to it. So in the topic of today's session, we mentioned the phrase business intelligence, one that's been around for a long time, been bandied about in different forms. So I'd like to start out with, why is it important for an organization to invest in business intelligence? Well, I'll give you about 3 or 4 statistics from recent customers that have implemented such a system. Reducing customers' time to pay by almost a third. Avoiding supplier price increases, reducing late shipments, and even increasing monthly AR collections by over $10,000. These are all statistics from real clients today who have implemented what's called operational business intelligence, and that's going to be the topic of our discussion. And look at that, I even forgot number 5, freeing up 100+ hours of staff time every month. So it's an interesting concept, business intelligence, specifically operational business intelligence, because it primarily impacts 2 parts of a business. But let me not get ahead of myself. I think those statistics are enough to garner your interest. So let's continue. What we're going to be talking about today is actually a specific kind of business intelligence, and it focuses very much on the concept of data visibility, or enabling your organization to become more data-driven. Becoming data-driven, what it really boils down to is expanding your organization's visibility into all of your data, not 300 data, but all of your business data in real time. This enables you to make more intelligent business decisions, to make them faster, and to make sure that those decisions are based upon facts and not assumptions. So, who are these data-driven initiatives typically designed for within an organization? Well, traditionally, they've been designed to appeal to managers and executives. Why? Because these are the folks within your organization who have the time to actually do this analysis. And what it requires is both the tools to do this analysis, traditionally referred to as slice and dice tools, and certainly also the time to use those tools and accomplish their research. It's traditionally been thought that everyone else within an organization, those folks below managers and executives, oh, these are the folks who are doing the everyday business operations. They're focused on TCB, taking care of business. But yet there's something nagging about that concept, because if it's true that the big picture success of an organization is important to a company, then isn't it also true that that big picture actually consists of a lot of little pictures that are really assembled and acted on by those worker bees within an organization, by the non-managerial staff? And so what this question brings to mind is, isn't the value of business intelligence really going beyond just those managers and executives within an organization? Wouldn't business intelligence be useful to all of those worker bees, all of those operational folks within a business? I think we can say that it would be. Intelligence benefits all members within an organization. It shouldn't be restricted to just managers and executives. So therefore, what about the concept of taking today's traditional BI tools, these slice and dice applications, and giving them, or giving access to them, to every single person within your organization, allowing everyone to do great data analysis, slice and dice business activities every which way they can? I think you'd probably also agree to say, heck no, we don't want to do that. Our operations people, they have their daily tasks to do. We can't just give them a tool that allows them to slice and dice and use up time that they need to be doing their tasks at hand. So again, this thought process is leading us in a certain direction. If it's true that all staff can benefit from becoming more data-driven, from this concept of business analysis, what we need to do is we need to match the right kind of business intelligence to the right people. And so that brings us back to this whole concept of becoming more data-driven and how an organization can make use of business intelligence. So let's now divide organizations into two parts: managers, executives first, and the operational folks second. Managers and executives typically use BI tools to gain insight into an organization's successes, failures, to manage exceptions. And as a result, managers and executives typically use business intelligence tools that A, let them analyze business activities to detect trends, spot inefficiencies, anomalies, etc. And number two, managers and executives use typically BI tools that let them postulate what-if scenarios to help predict future behavior and thus guide them to make changes in terms of corporate direction and policies. Now, this is great for managers and executives, but it's not what you want to give to your operational staff, because non-managerial staff need business intelligence that works a little bit differently. They need BI tools that help them complete their daily tasks at hand more easily, more quickly, and more efficiently, more intelligently than before. So non-managerial staff need a different type of BI solution, a solution that does just two things. Number one, gives them a greater visibility into and a better ability to respond to those individual time-sensitive tasks that take up the majority of their day. And number two, they need a BI solution that automates certain standard repetitive tasks. You know, a lot of what operations folks do within a business is stuff that they have to do day after day after day, generating invoices, sending order confirmations, just if this happens, then do that kind of thinking. And if we can automate that, we can actually free up people for more important or even additional tasks. So this concept of BI for the operations folks within an organization has the name of operational business intelligence. It's quite different from what you traditionally think of as a BI tool. Operational business intelligence does focus on those two areas I just mentioned. Number one, more visibility. So from an operational employee's perspective, this is what they need. Tell me what's happened that applies to me. Tell me what I need to do to complete my part in that process and deliver this information when I need it. Don't force me to ask for it, and deliver it to me how I need it, whether it's via text message to a cell phone, via an email, via dynamic web dashboard, regardless of where I am and what device I'm using. And then the second aspect of operational business intelligence, task automation. And we've just got some examples here. One I already mentioned. You know that when a new sales order is placed in Sage 300, you want to automatically send an order confirmation to the customer. Well, if you know that process, and currently that process is being done in part or completely manually, that's a great candidate for automation. And there's similar scenarios. You know that if a stock is running low, a stock item is running low in inventory, you should generate a purchase order, send it to the appropriate person for review, and then deliver it to the vendor. Or how about just getting a list every week of jobs that are due to start, shipments that have to go out this week or today. Again, it's if this is a condition that concerns me, then here's what I want to do. Here's what I want to automate. So let's consider a typical challenge faced by almost all organizations today, and really falls to the responsibility of the operational members of an organization, and it is late payers. We all have those customers who purchase from us, but sometimes fail to pay on time. So if we take that scenario, What do you do to discover and respond to a condition, a business condition like this? Do you periodically run certain reports or analytics to look for delinquent customers? If and when you find those, do you need to notify certain people? Do you need to remind the customer, hey, you're delinquent in paying? Do you need to notify the sales rep responsible for that client's account? Do you need to notify your CFO? Do you need to deliver certain relevant documents to the appropriate people? For Pete's sake, if a customer is past due and paying for an invoice, the best thing that we can do is to resend them a copy of that invoice and remind them that it's overdue. How about additional research? If a client has become past due, you might want to generate, for example, an AR aging report for that client. Send that report to that client's sales rep or account manager so that they have all the information they need when they place a call to that customer to try and resolve that situation. If a customer is past due, or perhaps egregiously past due, maybe we should put that customer automatically on hold so no additional orders are allowed to be processed for them. Maybe we need to change their payment terms as well. Now, in looking at those top 5 questions, if you answer yes to any of those, and usually it's to all of those, then you need to ask yourself the following questions. Whose job is it to detect clients who are past due? How soon are they detected that they are past due? What methods by which are they detected? You have to run a report, an analysis, a query. Within your organization, whose job is it to notify the appropriate people? How soon do they get notified? Who generates the corresponding documents like an invoice or a customer's statement? If additional research needs to get done, like generating that AR aging report, once again, whose task list does that fall onto? And if that customer is to be placed on credit hold or their payment terms changed, whose responsibility is that as well? There's a lot of stuff that needs to get done for just this one business scenario, late paying customers. Now, in my experience, what most businesses answer to these questions is the who's going to do this? Well, it's our staff. And how do they do it? Mostly manually. They regenerate an invoice. They email that invoice to the customer. And how soon does this get done? Well, sadly, the answer too often to that is not soon enough. So this is the key concept we're driving towards. In order to be competitive today, to stay competitive, to stay ahead of your competition, the processes of detection and response within your organization must be automated. And that's exactly what operational business intelligence does. It automatically detects for critical, time-sensitive business conditions. It automatically notifies the appropriate people. It automatically generates and delivers the relevant documents like an invoice or statement. It automatically triggers, executes, and delivers additional research, such as an AR aging report, a stock status report. And finally, it automatically updates Sage 300 and your other business applications so that both your people and your applications themselves are in sync. Okay. So now you've got this concept of this monitor, detect, and response technology that is operational business intelligence. Let me show you what that looks like in terms of a business application, a solution called Sage Alerts and Workflow. So I'm just going to bounce out of this PowerPoint for right now. We'll come back to it in a few minutes. And I want to talk to you a little bit about this technology called Alerts and Workflow. As its name implies, this is an operational business intelligence system that focuses on monitoring, alerting, and triggering intelligent workflow. You know, the analogy that I like to use for Sage Alerts and Workflow is that it's like a smoke detector for your business data, perhaps even a smoke detector combined with a sprinkler system. Because the whole purpose of Sage Alerts and Workflow is to automatically monitor your Sage 300 and related business, to automatically trigger responses to those conditions, putting out the fires if they exist. And you know something, I actually want to spend just a couple more minutes to first outline for you this Alerts and Workflow solution. So let me just jump back into our slide presentation for a moment. And let's actually continue by taking a look at just the components of Alerts and Workflow. So Alerts and Workflow begins by automatically monitoring your Sage 300 system for any business conditions that are important to you. Now, I say Sage 300. In fact, this applies not only to Sage 300, but to any ERP or accounting manufacturing system you're using. And as you'll see in a little bit later on, it even goes beyond ERP, so that if you're using a CRM solution, an HR solution, etc., Alerts and Workflow can automatically detect critical business conditions in those apps as well. Now, just to use Sage 300 as an example, out of the box, Alerts and Workflow ships with roughly 55 pre-configured business conditions that it can automatically detect and respond to, including all the ones you see on the current slide. Second component, automatically triggering notifications. You know, whenever people think of alerts these days, you tend to think of email. And yeah, that's one of the methods by which information can be communicated. So too is text messaging to a cell phone. But how about just dynamically populating web dashboards? Someone down in shipping having a window up that says, here's a list of all of the shipments that need to go out today. Someone up in accounting that has a window up that says, here are all the invoices coming due this week. Or perhaps another window that says, here are all the overdue invoices. Automatically generating relevant forms, documents, and reports, whether it's an invoice, an order confirmation, a statement, a purchase order. All of your standard forms and documents can be automatically generated and delivered by Alerts and Workflow. Additional analysis. Again, sometimes what you really want when certain business conditions exist is some detailed analysis. If, for example, Alerts and Workflow has detected that one of your customers has changed their buying habits, they're all of a sudden buying a lot more or a lot less than they used to, probably the best thing that you could do would be to generate a sales history report for that client and automatically send that report to that client's sales rep. Now, speaking of reporting, sometimes a picture is actually worth 1,000 words, as the saying goes. So Alerts and Workflow has the ability to generate graphical analysis as well. A sales history report, well, that can run to 10 or 12 pages, but a nice looking bar chart that just shows a customer's sales over the last 6, 9, or 12 months would probably summarize that even better. And then the final component is really the workflow component, the ability for Alerts and Workflow to go back into your ERP system and do things like put a delinquent customer on credit hold or create a purchase order for an item that is nearing or has dropped below its reorder level. So we refer to this as the workflow component, and again, this means more than just going into Sage 300. If, for example, you happen to be using Sage CRM as well, or for that matter, any CRM application, if a customer does become delinquent, what you might want Alerts and Workflow to do is to actually schedule a phone call in the CRM application, assign that call to the customer's sales rep so that they have an immediate task to follow up with that customer and try and resolve that delinquent invoice. So these are the 6 components of Alerts and Workflow, everything from automatically detecting conditions within your Sage and related applications to triggering alerts, reports, and workflow. Okay, so I wanted to give you that visual description before I jumped into the application itself, but now I think you're ready to see the solution. So let's take a jump back into Alerts and Workflow. Now, a couple of general words about the Alerts and Workflow technology. First and foremost, it's a server-based application. You typically install it on just one system within your IT environment. It does not need a dedicated server. You could put it on your ERP server, on your Exchange server, or even SQL Server box. In fact, I'm demoing it to you now from my own PC, from my notebook computer. Alerts and Workflow runs as a Windows service. So what that means is, I'm going to go back to that smoke detector analogy. Once you tell Alerts and Workflow the types of business conditions that you want it to monitor for, you quite literally turn it on and walk away from it. It runs in a lights out processing environment. Again, very much like that smoke detector analogy of simply monitoring for conditions and triggering the appropriate responses when those conditions occur. So Let's take a moment to take a look at a typical alerts and workflow event. And since I used an example of late paying customers earlier on in this session, let's see if we can find a relevant event. So we've got a number of different conditions, in this case within accounts receivable, that alerts and workflow is monitoring for. I think that in order to try and reduce delinquent customers and to try and reduce having to write off bad debt, a very typical event is to have alerts and workflow automatically deliver invoices that are coming due to customers within the next week or 7 days. So we'll just choose that event that you see right here. And let me take a few moments to talk about how alerts and workflow does what it does. Every event consists of up to 5 components, and the first of those tells me whether or not we're currently checking for this condition, and if so, how often. This particular event is running every day at 9 o'clock in the morning. So every day at 9 a.m., alerts and workflow is going to go and send out alerts about invoices that are coming due over the next week. Now, each event can have its own schedule. Those business conditions that are very time sensitive, perhaps monitoring stock levels, you might need to do that every hour. You can monitor things every few minutes, continuously, or even less frequently. We'll see later on in doing automated trend analysis how we can have alerts and workflow run an event on the first day of every month to see which customers have changed their buying habits. But let's stick with this event for now. By the way, when I cursor over this branch, you'll notice also alerts and workflow tells me that repeat is turned on. What that means is that when this event runs, if an invoice is unpaid, alerts and workflow will notify the corresponding people, such as the customer and their sales rep. The next time the event runs, if that same invoice is still unpaid, alerts and workflow is going to send another or repeat alert. It's your choice. You can have repeat alerts or one-time alerts. In some cases, like invoices that are coming due, you might want to continue to remind a customer until that payment is actually received. Now, the second component in every event is referred to as its query. This is really the triggering condition. And this query is looking for invoices that are coming due within a certain number of days. Now, one of the nice things about alerts and workflow is that you're able to specify what those triggering thresholds are. 7 days, 14 days, 3 days, perhaps 1 day to notify a customer that an invoice is coming due tomorrow. And of course, based upon authorizations and permissions in the system, you can change that triggering threshold to whatever value you want. In fact, one of the things I like about this particular event is notice it's using a query called invoices coming due in less than X days. And in fact, I have 3 different events all using the same triggering condition, invoices coming due in 30 days, 14 days, and this event looking at 7 days. Now, whenever I talk about triggering conditions, folks often ask me, well, Don, that's all well and good, but what if we need to exclude certain customers from this logic? We know that we've got some customers who always pay late, they do it, we know it, we're okay with it, we don't want to include them in this logic. Can we add those conditions to this trigger? And the answer is yes, and you don't have to be a programmer to know how to do so. What you do need is a familiarity with, in this case, because I'm connected to Sage 300, the database schema for Sage 300, or the database schema of whatever application you're connecting alerts and workflow to. So in plain English, you don't have to be a programmer, but you do need to know where in a database certain data resides. And if you don't have that expertise, not a problem, because the good folks at Acumen absolutely do. They probably know this in their sleep. So this query is retrieving data about open invoices. And here in the query designer, I'm able to pick and choose individual fields of data, such as how much an invoice was for, when it was due, etc. All of the fields from your ERP system can be automatically included in outgoing alerts. And by the way, you can actually get quite sophisticated here. For example, if I wanted to total all of the past due invoices per customer and deliver that, I can do so simply by choosing the summarize function. If I wanted to know about any customers who had more than 3 past due invoices, I could tell alerts and workflow to count the number of invoices that meet this criteria. And if I wanted to know about any invoices that were more than, let's say, 67 days past due, I can actually come right into a calculation wizard and actually tell Alerts and Workflow what calculation I wish to perform, such as calculating the difference in days between two dates. In that case, it might be the invoice due date and the current date. But let's come back to our main window. Don't want to spend too much time to get stuck in the bits and bytes details, but I do want to show you two last aspects of the Query Designer. The Filters tab. This is where you'd go in to say, okay, I need to exclude certain customers from this logic. So we could add an additional filter on the customer and say, we don't want to include invoices for customers A, B, C, and D. What we've got here are two filters. We're looking at the amount due to make sure it's greater than 0. By the way, everything here is available in plain English format, no programming necessary. And then we are doing a bit of a date calculation to calculate the number of days until an invoice is due. And you can do all sorts of fun things here, and or logic, Boolean logic. And by the way, if you've ever considered that, gee, it would be really nice to know when someone changes one or more fields within your ERP database, you can actually come right down here to if column values have changed. And for example, if I'm concerned that someone has changed the due date of an invoice, that sounds like a bad thing. We can actually tell Alerts and Workflow to start auditing the value in that field. And so Alerts and Workflow will tell you if and when that field's value has changed and what has changed from and to. So let's see if we have any matching invoices out here that are coming due within the next 7 days. We'll specify 7, and we get a number of matching records. And we can confirm that those, in fact, are all invoices coming due in the next week. Okay. So you've got an idea for the query part of an event. Now, it's the response mechanism. What do we want the event to do if and when it finds that we've got invoices coming due in a certain number of days? Well, first and foremost, let's tell someone about those invoices. Now, from the presentation earlier, I mentioned sending out alerts via email and text message and web dashboard, and you can see some of those deliveries here. In fact, this is somewhat of an atypical event. Maybe you don't often have alerts being sent out via all of these methods, but just some of them. But let's take a look at one of them. Let's go in and edit once again based upon permissions. So all of the fields of data from your ERP database can be put into your alert message. And we can see our alert message here for an IM alert is showing us the invoice number and the amount and the due date. What I don't see here is the original date of the invoice. So let's see if we can find that field. There's my date invoice. So let's just go in here and say dated. And let's just drop in this field. So creating or editing alert messages for all your delivery methods is as easy as this. When it comes to email, we support both plain text and also HTML formatted emails, which always brings up the question, do you have to know how to create HTML syntax? Because that's what I see here. No, the answer is you don't. Alerts and Workflow actually ships with HTML templates, and we're also shortly coming out with a native HTML editor. For right now, you can simply use all of the templates that are in Alerts and Workflow. So all you're doing is dropping in the corresponding data fields. Now, let me move this window over to the left a little bit, because you can see here, in addition to all of these alerts going out via different methods, we're also having Alerts and Workflow automatically generate an invoice in PDF format. So let's go to our Reports tab. And so here you can see, this is our standard invoice form for, in this case, Sage 300. We're telling Alerts and Workflow to generate this invoice in PDF format. You could choose other formats as well. I personally like PDF. And so Alerts and Workflow is going to automatically see those invoices that are coming due in 7 days, going to generate corresponding invoices in PDF. And as you'll see in just a moment, send that invoice off to the customer and copy the sales rep. But since we're on this Reports tab, you'll notice we're also generating a chart. As I said, sometimes a picture really is worth 1,000 pages of reports. So let's just have ourselves a quick look at this chart. The chart design functionality is part of Sage Alerts. So let's jump down to the bottom of this window and actually take a look at this particular chart. So this is showing us total invoices coming due per sales rep as of today. And we can see Bill here probably doing products, but not perhaps quite as good a job collecting or having his customers pay close to $1 million worth of receivables in this account. These charts and graphs can be sent along within an email, attached to an email. They can be posted to a website. So again, regardless of where a person is or what kind of device they are using, Alerts and Workflow can deliver the appropriate data to them. I can see this particular event is even picking up a Microsoft Word document on electronic bill pay and going to be sending that off to the customer as well. So we've identified what content we want Alerts and Workflow to generate. The next step is to specify whom we wanted to deliver that content to. In plain English, who do we want to send the alerts to? Here in Alerts and Workflow, recipients are referred to as subscribers, and this event has 4. The first 2 are my finance group and myself. Now, individuals and groups are defined by you. For each person or group, you can choose to notify them via any one or any combination of Alert and Workflow's delivery methods. Now, key point here, in Sage 300, as well as any other system, ERP or not, you've already got names and addresses for people. You've got customer names, their email addresses, vendor names, their contact information, etc. Do you need to manually enter this into Alerts and Workflow? Do you need to do an import? Absolutely not. Alerts and Workflow will automatically read all of your users, vendors, etc., right out of your ERP database. And so as new vendors, new customers, etc., are added to your ERP system, they're changed, have their addresses changed or deleted from that system, those changes are automatically and instantly reflected within Alerts and Workflow. And much as I'm flattered that I'm being included as an alert recipient here, in all honesty, it's the final 2 subscribers that are the most important for this event. Referred to as dynamic subscribers, because if you think about this event, Alerts and Workflow going out and finding invoices that are coming due in the next 7 days, the most logical people to deliver those alerts to are the customer and the customer's sales rep. And those are going to change based upon which invoices are coming due, so therefore they are dynamic recipients. Basically, Alerts and Workflow is going to look at each invoice, see who the customer is, who the related sales rep is, and automatically deliver the requisite information, alerts, documents, etc., to those people. And by the way, just something kind of fun I like to point out with Alerts and Workflow. In my case, I actually have 2 delivery addresses. Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., I get notified at my work email address. But if an alert needs to reach me on Saturdays or on Sundays or potentially at 2 in the morning, I actually have Alerts and Workflow automatically generate to a secondary address. In my case, it's my personal Gmail email address. We refer to that as Follow Me Alerts. And then we come to the last component of an event, and that's the actions. What do we want this event to do aside from just notifying people and delivering forms, documents, reports, etc.? Do I want Alerts and Workflow to potentially export data? For example, in this case, we're still good because the invoice hasn't come due yet, but if we've got customers with overdue invoices, well, in that case, maybe we're working with a collections agency, and that collections agency says, will you please send me a comma-delimited file once a week of all of your customers' overdue invoices so that we can do follow-up. Excuse me. Maybe I want Alerts and Workflow to go back into my ERP system and actually add or update data. Now, the methods by which Alerts and Workflow can do this is many and varied. Now, an important note here. When it comes to updating data, Alerts and Workflow imposes 2 levels of security. Not only must a person be authorized for access to Alerts and Workflow, they must be specially authorized for access to this Actions tab. We want to be very careful that updates are performed only by people who have the requisite knowledge and authorizations. So among the workflow actions that can be executed from here, doing things like running VB scripts, calling programs, COM objects, simply executing SQL insert or update statements, and in our coming release, integration with web services as well. All right. So let me just come back a couple of branches here because I want to show you in comparison to this event, which in my book is actually a relatively simple, straightforward condition. If an invoice is coming due, then I want alerts and workflow to deliver that to the corresponding customer, to something a little bit more sophisticated. So I'm going to drop down here to Sage 300 Sales Order Trends, just to give you an idea of just how sophisticated you can get with alerts and workflow. I'm going to choose the third event here. This to me is a very cool event. This event is running on the first day of every month at 9 o'clock in the morning. And what this event does is the following. It looks to see what each customer purchased for the month just ended. Then alerts and workflow goes back 6 months. Could be 9 months, could be 12 months. In this case, it's 6 months. Why? In order to derive an average monthly order amount per customer. And then alerts and workflow compares for each customer what they purchased last month versus their average monthly sales. And if their sales for last month represents a decrease of at least 30% versus the customer's average, then alerts and workflow is going to alert someone. In this case, it'll be the sales rep. And let's have ourselves a look at this particular email alert message. It's in plain text, but oh, how valuable it is. Hello, salesperson. This customer of yours has placed orders for the previous month to date that represents a decrease of at least 30% over their average month. And take a look at the 4 fields of data we have here. We're showing the customer's sales for the last month, the month just ended. We're showing the customers, and this will be for each customer who's had a drop of at least 30%. We're showing their average monthly sales, and then we're showing the decrease. The decrease represented both as a dollar amount and as a percentage. It's funny, just yesterday I was in conversation with a gentleman who used to work for the Department of Defense, and he said, wow, how they could have used this kind of analysis, not so much on customers, but simply on projects that were running over budget. And I had to bite my tongue not to say anything about Department of Defense budgets. But he said, I wish we had had that when he had been with the DOD. All right. So you've got the sense for exactly what alerts and workflow can do. So let me just finish up with a few last concepts to share with you, and then we'll open up the phone lines a bit. So business benefits of alerts and workflow. Yeah, I've shown you what alerts and workflow can do for Sage 300, a very specific ERP solution. But alerts and workflow works with all Sage solutions, but even beyond that. If you're using add-on solutions like Sage Sales Tax or Inventory Advisor, alerts and workflow works with those solutions as well, so it can monitor the data in those apps either individually or in concert with your ERP system. Alerts and workflow reduces what's called data latency, the amount of time between when critical business conditions occur and your organization's ability to be aware of them and respond to them. I don't know if you might be familiar with a current initiative, very popular today, called the Zero Latency Initiative. The idea being as soon as information becomes available and visible, let's identify it, let's analyze it, let's respond to it and act on it. So with alerts and workflow, obviously a person doesn't have to be reliant on email. Receiving a text message is an awfully nice heads up, perhaps with the email sitting behind it with details. I personally am a huge fan of web alerts, a nice dynamic window that shows me the current business conditions of certain activities within my ERP system. All of your standard forms and documents, invoicing, purchase orders, and the like can be automatically generated and delivered by alerts and workflow. Auditing, triggering intelligent updates. And finally, and this one I just want to take a moment to pause on because I haven't mentioned it thus far. The very last item here is a capability of alerts and workflow that often goes overlooked. when we consider monitoring the data within your organization, not just ERP, but all of your business applications, sometimes one very important business application is overlooked: email. Do you have generic email accounts within your organization like info at, sales at, support at yourcompany.com? And if you do, whose job is it to watch over those incoming messages? Or is it the case that most of those messages that are sent to those generic accounts, they're like black holes? And sometimes you discover a message there from a week ago, a month ago, and you think, wow, I wish I had known about it when this came in. I would have done something about it. So alerts and workflow can also monitor an unlimited number of email accounts for incoming messages and can process them and respond to them just like it can conditions in your ERP system. I think one of the key concepts that I want to share with you is the fact that although alerts and workflow is considered an operational business intelligence system, its price is actually less than 1/10 of traditional BI slice it and dice it tools. And the folks at Acumen can provide you with licensing numbers, but I think you'll be very pleasantly surprised. I've been involved with this product for over 20 years. I've seen over 10,000, well, actually, I believe it's closer to 12,000 customers embrace it. I've never had a single customer come back to me and say it's too expensive. The application is very quickly installed, configured, and up and running. What's very cool about it, again, going back to that smoke detector analogy, it's not an end user app. It's an app that gets installed. You tell it what conditions to look for, how often to check for them, what to do if and when those conditions arise. Then you turn it on and walk away from it. You have one person, an administrator, who's trained in the product. Everyone else, they're just receiving alerts, reports, workflow, etc. So I mentioned over 10,000, and today I think it's over 12,000 customers. Our support staff receives fewer than 8 incoming support requests a day. This is truly a set it and forget it solution. One of my favorite customer quotes is from the owner of a chain of pizzerias. And when interviewed about alerts and workflow and asked, what does he like best about the solution? His answer was simple: it just works. Again, and I think that speaks to that smoke detector analogy: set it up, turn it on, walk away from it. It has been the recipient of numerous awards and commendations, which I promise I will not bore you with, although I just like to make a mention for Forbes, because they're certainly an organization that know a thing or two about business. They gave the alerts and workflow technology their commendation for top productivity enhancing tool. So some uses, and these are some of the statistics that we saw at the very start of today's presentation. I was actually at a trade show about a month ago, and I had a customer come up to me. He was waving his cell phone rather frantically in front of him, saying, "Don, take a look at this." And he'd actually just gotten an alert from Alerts and Workflow identifying a particular item that had been put onto a purchase order. It received an email back from the supplier that their prices had gone up. Alerts and Workflow had seen that, automatically identified alternate vendors who offered that same item for a lower price, and actually communicated that via an email alert to this particular customer. He was quite excited about that. So one particular customer I just want to go into a little bit of detail about. This is Toyo Inc. They're a multinational manufacturer of ink for printing presses. They actually came to us with a very specific challenge in mind, and it was they started talking to us about something called DSO, Days Sales Outstanding. It was taking a very long time for them to get paid by their customers, and in fact, they were having to write off a lot of bad debt every month. So they embraced Alerts and Workflow, and when I say embraced, I mean a full hug, because after 6 months, they came back to us and said, we just passed over 20,000 alert messages sent via Alerts and Workflow. I think my immediate response was, wow, did you mean to send all of those? And they laughed and assured us that, yeah, indeed they did, because they were doing much more than just collections. They were sending out order confirmations, shipment confirmations. They were proactively sending payment alerts, invoices coming for due, and the like. the results that they got were really quite staggering. They actually estimated over 100 work hours every month saved by virtue of the task automation part of alerts and workflow. You can see the quote off to the right, alerts and workflow doing the work of 1 to 2 full-time staff members. And they also very, very proudly showed that on a monthly basis, they'd actually raised their AR collections by about $11,000, with alerts and workflow costing far less than that. Okay. So finally, just to leave you with some concepts to ponder, should you embrace this concept of becoming more data-driven? Should you embrace the concept of operational business intelligence? Well, here's some questions to ponder, and if the answers to those are yes, then you should certainly take a closer look at an operational business intelligence system. First and foremost, you have a lot of date-sensitive data, due dates, deliver dates, promise dates, expiration dates, and the like. You have critical thresholds that should drive business decisions. When a customer reaches 80, 85, 90% of their credit limit, then we need to notify them, their sales rep, we need to put them on credit hold to pay down their existing debt. You know, one of my favorite uses for alerts and workflow, but often again, folks don't think of, is the following. Do you have certain business activities that should happen on a recurring or periodic basis, but sometimes don't? I refer to this as inactivity monitoring. One of the most popular uses of alerts and workflow is the following. Tell me about a customer who has not placed an order in the last month. If you have customers with whom you do repeat business, you need to know when that customer stops with you. If you have certain items in inventory that have not moved within a certain number of days, you need to know about that. Exception management. You know, I always like to ask folks, if you were to open up your top center desk drawer, would you find one or more highlighter pens in that drawer? And if so, what do you use them for? I know what you use them for. You use them when someone drops a report on your desk and you start paging through that report one page at a time, highlighting just those items that require your attention. Well, that's old technology. If you know what are those exceptions that are important to your company, automate the process by which those exceptions are found, communicated, and responded to. We've looked at how alerts and workflow can perform automated trend analysis. I think it's safe to say that virtually every business today wants to do trend analysis, but few organizations actually have the time to do so. And then finally, looking at your ERP system, do you need to know when certain data has been changed, this concept of auditing? And you know, all of that has to do with monitoring and responding to business conditions. But let's not forget about one more use of alerts and workflow. Do you have manual, repetitive processes that should be automated, like sending an order confirmation, sending an invoice or statement to a customer who's past due, creating a purchase order, etc.? If, again, some or most of your answers to those questions were yes, then what I'd really encourage you to take a look at is something called the Alerts and Workflow Needs Assessment Tool. This tool is available at www.alertsandworkflow.com, all spelled out, alertsandworkflow.com. You'll see up at the kind of top center of that page, there will be some text that reads, "Do you need Sage Alerts and Workflow? Click here to find out." That takes you into this needs assessment tool. This tool takes about 5 to 7 minutes to complete. There's no costs or obligations in doing so. You can take it multiple times. It asks you about the various business processes within your business. It asks you about critical business conditions that you need to monitor, need to be aware of, need to respond to. Basically, it asks you a series of questions about processes. How important are those processes to your organization? To what degree are those processes currently automated or manual? When you answer those questions, again, the whole thing takes about 5 to 7 minutes. You're presented with this report card to show you, for those general capabilities of alerts and workflow, which of those you can most use or would most benefit your organization. And so, pardon me, with that, That brings us to the end of this session, at least the end of my part of the session. So let me turn things back over to our Acumen hosts and see if we have any questions that we can answer.
Thanks very much, Don. For anyone that would like to answer a question, please remember that the Q&A or the chat windows are available for you. We'll monitor both of those, and we'll relay them over to Don to get an answer.
Thanks very much. And you know, I just want to mention one answer to a question that often gets asked, and that is, where can folks get more information about this? Well, certainly that alertsandworkflow.com website. But if you want to get into some technical details about the product, you can actually, from that site, download the Alerts and Workflow manual. It's a free download. You can also access training courses on the product. We have a video library. So if you're intrigued by some of what you saw during the product demo part of today's session, you can actually access this training video library. Again, it's free to everyone. There are a bunch of courses there, but they're very short, very focused. Each course runs an average of about 10 to 12 minutes. Also, there is an ROI calculation tool that you can access from there. And of course, the needs analysis tool that I talked about just a couple moments ago.
Don, one question that came in is, are you able to preview an email when you're building an alert via email or an HTML template?
You can, as a matter of fact, in Alerts and Workflow, and actually it's kind of a two-part answer to that. The two-part answer is, in Alerts and Workflow, when you configure an event, there's an option to test the event. So you're not actually running it, you're testing it. And what that test does is it actually brings up a web browser and shows you what the event would have done, including the text or the format, the content of an email, or for that matter, any manner of alert delivery. So the answer is a very enthusiastic yes, you can, using the test this now function for a given event. And I just want to expand upon that for a bit, because there's also, in my opinion, a very useful tool in Alerts and Workflow called Schedule This Event Now. I actually like to bring this up because although it's one of my favorite options, it's actually not one of my favorite worded options in the application. Schedule this event now in Alerts and Workflow actually means run this event once right now. So as you're building events and as you're testing them, as you will do, the option to actually run an event once right now so that you can see the results is really useful. And then the second part of my answer here is that there's a separate module in Alerts and Workflow called the Monitor, one of my favorite parts of the application. It's really an operator's console. What has Alerts and Workflow been up to? What's it been doing? What business conditions have been occurring, and what has Alerts and Workflow itself done in response? So in that Monitor module, it'll show you every event that's been run, those that have been triggered by matching business conditions, and then in a specific section called Application Events Triggered Today, when you look at an individual triggered event, i.e. one that sent out an alert message, there's a button called Deliverables. Deliverables will show you everything that the event did. Did it send out an email alert? Did it generate a report? Did it trigger an update back into an application? So from there, you can also see the content of the alert that was delivered. Alerts and Workflow will actually tell you whether the alert successfully reached its intended recipient. It'll even tell you such things as how many seconds of processor time did an event take to run. And that's actually a fairly important thing with Alerts and Workflow, because when you're dealing with large data sets, then you want to make sure that your queries and events are optimally designed. And so having alerts actually tell you the amount of time, the amount of system resources that each event took to execute is quite handy. So that was a rather long-winded answer to that question. And I'll add to that with one wind, which is we're right now on the cusp, or approaching the cusp, of a new release, version 10 of Alerts and Workflow. It actually introduces an additional user interface, a web-based UI. It also includes a native HTML editor, and I alluded to that a little bit earlier. But We're continue to make some really nice enhancements into the product. So for previewing alert messages, which is what brought this conversation up, and the like, the version 10 is going to expand upon the options that are currently available for preview in version 9 of Alerts and Workflow.
Okay. Next question, Don. Could you remind us where the additional videos and manuals are located, please?
Yes, in fact, the best way for me to do that is let me actually bring up a web browser window. Oh, this is interesting. Actually, this is, since I brought up a web browser window, this is actually a sample alert sent from Alerts and Workflow. This is sent to me actually by a business partner of ours, created this parts above maximum alert. Kind of a nice looking table in that with an associated chart as well as an Excel spreadsheet. But let me not get carried away. Let me get back to the point of question here. So, you know what I'm going to do is actually give you a bit of a shortcut. I've taken you to the alertsandworkflow.com website initially. And while I'm here, I do want to point out that if you click on the tab called Buy Sage Product, you can actually drill down to Sage 300. And I mentioned that there's some 55 or so pre-configured business conditions. If you're thinking, well, I wonder what those are, you can actually display that list of included events from here. But the question specifically was about where can you access the additional technical information, the manual, the training courses, etc. And for that, an actual shorter cut, and I'll just go and log into the system here, is to go to Alerts and Workflow itself. So if we go back to this website, you can see the address up at the top. In this case is www.vineyardsoft.com. That's actually the name of our organization. We're the developers of Alerts and Workflow. We actually call the product KnowledgeSync. That's our internal name for the product. So as you're looking at any of these materials, if you run across KnowledgeSync and think, wait a minute, he was talking to me about Sage Alerts and Workflow, they are indeed one in the same. So specifically your questions. Go to the support page, and from within support, go to documentation. Now in documentation, if you go to technical documents, you'll see the manual is right here, the first item under technical documents. To download it, review it. You've heard me mention dashboard alerts a number of times, or web alerts in Alerts and Workflow. It's a cool alert delivery method, and so if you want more details about that, you can also access what we call the dashboard setup kit. From the documentation page from this website, you can also drop down to training and then click on training videos. That will take you to this, as I said, fairly extensive collection of videos on Alerts and Workflow, really focused, of course, on the event design process. These are all free. Again, each of these runs about 10 to 12 minutes on average. So feel free to have a look at absolutely any of these. And of course, if you do have any questions about anything that you see or read, feel free to pop a request into our customer support department. So that's the best places from which you can access that data.
Okay, any other questions? We'll just give it another moment here.